There is no rush right now. There is nowhere you need to be. Nothing waiting on the other side of this moment. Whatever the day held for you, it is already behind you now, settling quietly like dust after a long walk home. And right here, in whatever corner of the world you are resting tonight, you are allowed to let it all go. There is nothing to figure out, nothing to solve. Just this, just the sound of a voice and the night gathering around you, warm and still. Let me take you somewhere slow, somewhere the air smells like cut grass and something sweet you can almost name. Somewhere the light comes in soft through old curtains and the afternoons stretch so long they seem to forget themselves. Let me take you to the kind of place you carry somewhere quietly inside you, the kind of summer that felt like it would never end. The farmhouse sat at the end of a gravel lane, set back just far enough from the county road that the sounds of passing cars faded before they could reach the porch. It was a white clapboard house, 2 stories, with a screen door that had a particular song to it, a low metallic note as it swung open, and then a soft, familiar slap as it fell closed behind you. The kind of sound that meant home in a way that was impossible to fully explain. The kind of sound that lives somewhere behind the ribs. Clara Weston had made the drive down from the city in the early morning, leaving before the streets filled, while the sky was still a deep and tender blue. She had driven with the windows down for the last hour, once the highway gave way to smaller roads and the towns grew quieter and more spaced apart. And by the time she turned onto the gravel lane, her hair was loose, and her shoulders had dropped an inch or 2 from where they usually sat. The air out here smelled different. It always had. Even as a child, she had noticed that the moment the trees thickened along the road and the fields opened up on either side, the air changed. It got softer somehow, slower, like it was in less of a hurry to be anywhere. The farmhouse had belonged to her grandmother, Nora Weston, for more than 50 years. Nora had lived in it alone for the last decade of her life, keeping the garden, feeding the birds, making lemonade in a tall glass pitcher with a slice of lemon draped over the rim the way she always had. She had passed the previous autumn, quietly, in the way that some people go, as if they had simply decided it was time to rest. And now the house belonged to Clara, not sold, not rented, not converted into anything, just kept, just held, the way you hold something that matters. Clara had come for the whole summer. She had arranged it months ago, telling herself she needed the space to think, or maybe the opposite of thinking. She had packed her car with books she might not read and candles she would definitely light, and a pair of old sneakers she had owned for 20 years and never been able to throw away. She had also, without entirely meaning to, packed a certain quietness of intention. She had not made plans. She had not made a schedule. She had simply come. She pulled up in front of the house just as the morning was beginning to warm, and she sat in the car for a moment with the engine off, listening. The gravel ticked softly as it settled. A bird called from somewhere in the old oak at the corner of the yard, a slow, unhurried call, and then silence. The fields beyond the fence were green and heavy with summer, and the sky above was a pale, washed blue, with thin clouds moving so slowly they seemed barely to be moving at all. She got out and stood in the lane for a moment, just breathing. Inside, The house was exactly as she remembered it, and also, somehow more, itself. The front hallway had that particular smell that old houses have, a layering of years, of wood and dust and something faintly floral. Lavender, she thought, from the sachets Nora had always kept in the linen closet. The floors were wide wooden boards that creaked in all the same places. She remembered the second step on the stairs, the spot just inside the kitchen doorway, the corner near the window in the sitting room. She walked through each room slowly, not checking on anything, just moving through the house the way you move through water, feeling it close, gently around her. In the kitchen, she filled the kettle and set it on the stove. She stood at the window while it heated, looking out at the garden. The garden had gone a little wild without Nora's steady attention, but not unpleasantly so. The rose bushes had grown big and soft and a little too wide, and the lavender along the back fence had spread itself generously in both directions. And the sunflowers, which must have self-seeded from last year or the year before, had come up in clusters near the south wall, tall and cheerful, and completely without permission. It was a garden that had decided to take care of itself. There was something admirable about that. Rosie found her before the kettle boiled. The cat had been left in the care of a neighbor, old Mr. Aldrich from the house on the other side of the lane, who had been coming over each day to fill the food bowl and open a window in the afternoon. Rosie was an orange tabby of no particular ambition, deeply committed to warmth and stillness, and she materialized in the kitchen doorway with an expression of complete composure, considered Clara for a moment, and then walked to her food bowl and sat beside it with the quiet certainty of someone who had never doubted how the world worked. Clara poured the cat's breakfast first. Then she made her own tea. She carried it out to the porch. The porch ran the length of the front of the house and faced east, which meant that the mornings were full of light and the afternoons were shaded and cool. There was a wooden swing at one end painted white, the paint worn smooth on the armrests from years of hands resting there. Clara sat in the swing and tucked her feet up beneath her and held her mug in both hands and let the morning come to her. The sun was climbing. It came through the trees at a low angle still, cutting long shadows across the yard, and the light on the grass was the particular gold of early summer mornings, the kind of light that does not last long, that softens and shifts as the sun rises. But for now, it lay across everything like something poured from a jar. The garden at the side of the house caught it too, and the sunflowers lifted their faces toward it with that unhurried, absolute certainty that sunflowers have. Across the lane, she could see Mr. Aldrich in his own garden. He was a tall, thin man in his early 80s, with white hair and a particular way of moving that suggested someone who had never been in a hurry and had never suffered for it. He had taught history at the county high school for 30-some years, and he carried that patient, observational quality that good teachers often develop, a kind of stillness behind the eyes, a sense that he was always quietly listening to more than just the words being spoken. He noticed Clara on the porch and raised one hand in a slow wave. She raised her mug in return. He smiled and went back to his tomatoes. There were mornings in the weeks that followed when Clara would wake before the heat of the day had settled in, and she would lie still for a moment in the old iron bed, listening to the sounds of the house and the sounds outside the house, and they were so layered and so gentle that she sometimes felt she was lying at the bottom of a very warm, very still body of water. The ceiling above her was white, with a small water stain near the corner that she had known her whole life and never thought to notice until now. Shaped a little like a bird in flight, or maybe a leaf, depending on the light. She would lie there and watch the morning work its way in through the curtains, the light shifting from gray to gold to white, and she would not reach for anything, not her phone, not a thought, not a plan. She would just be there, in that quiet room, in that quiet house, in that quiet summer. Rosie usually found her way upstairs by mid-morning. She had a rotation of sleeping spots, each one calibrated precisely to where the light fell at what time of day, and the foot of the old bed caught the late morning sun beautifully. She would settle there with the focused seriousness of someone performing an important function, which, in her own estimation, she was. Clara grew fond of waking to the sound of a small, steady purr somewhere near her feet. On certain mornings, she would walk, not for exercise, not toward anything in particular, but in the way that summer walking has always worked, slow and meandering, attentive to small things. The lane stretched from the farmhouse down to a dirt road that wound between two fields and eventually reached a wooden bridge over a shallow creek. She had walked that road as a child, first with Nora, and then on her own as she got older, and the walk had a quality to it that she had not found in many places, a feeling of being held by the landscape, of the fields and the trees and the slow sky being somehow arranged around you, not for any particular purpose, but simply in the generous way that good things sometimes arrange themselves. The creek was called Blackberry Run, a name that showed up on old county maps with a small, earnest label in faded ink. The water was clear and shallow and ran over smooth, pale stones. And in summer, the blackberry canes grew thick along both banks, their thorns and their dark, sweet fruit arriving together the way things often do. Clara would sometimes sit on the wooden bridge with her feet hanging over the edge, watching the water move below her. And there was something about the sound of it, that small, consistent sound of water over stone that settled into her like a slow breath, settling into a body at rest. She brought a book sometimes, but she rarely read more than a few pages. The creek had other things to say. Afternoons at the farmhouse moved at a pace that was almost geological. The heat of the day would come in and press itself against the windows, and the house would go into a kind of slow, dignified stillness in response. The fans turned, the curtains breathed in the small movements of air that found their way through. In the sitting room, Nora's old radio sat on the side table beneath the window, a heavy wooden thing with a curved top and a warm amber light that came on behind the dial when it was playing. Clara had found a station early in the first week that played nothing but instrumental music in the afternoons, slow piano pieces, and the occasional string quartet, the kind of music that did not ask anything of you, that simply moved through the room like light through water. She learned to make lemonade that summer, or perhaps to remember how. Nora had always made it from scratch, squeezing the lemons herself with a small ceramic press, adding sugar that she had dissolved in warm water first so it would blend smoothly, filling the tall pitcher with ice and water and the yellow sweet smell of it, and setting it on the counter where it would sweat a little ring of cold onto the wood. Clara made it the same way. She was not sure if it tasted better than the kind you could simply mix from a powder, but it felt different to hold the glass. It felt like something that had been made with care. Mr. Aldrich came by sometimes in the late afternoon. When the heat had peaked and was beginning to ease, he would come to the back door and knock twice in the particular rhythm he always used. 2 knocks with a brief pause between them, and Clara would call him in and pour 2 glasses of lemonade, and they would sit at the kitchen table with the back door open and the garden visible beyond it, and they would talk about very little in a way that felt like a great deal. He told her stories about Nora sometimes, not sorrowful ones, just quiet ones, the way Nora had been the first person on the lane to plant a butterfly garden, long before anyone called it that. The way she had kept the names of every child in the county who had ever knocked on her door at Halloween, written in a small notebook in her looping handwriting, along with what they had been dressed as. The year there had been 3 separate children dressed as astronauts, and she had noted them all, Apollo 1 through Apollo 3, with a small star beside each name. Clara listened and turned her lemonade glass slowly on the table and felt the afternoon hold still around her. It was strange, and also not strange at all, the way the summer had a texture to it that was different from any other season. The light was the first thing. Summer light in the late afternoon was unlike any other light of the year. It came in low and gold and almost amber, and it touched everything it found with a quality that made ordinary things look briefly like they had been painted. The side of a barn, a row of sunflowers, the white paint on a fence post, the chrome handle of an old screen door. Each of these things, caught in that late afternoon light, held a particular glow, and the glow did not demand anything of you. It just was. The sound of summer, too, was its own thing. The cicadas started up in the trees sometime in the first week of Clara's stay, and they did not stop. A continuous sound that rose and fell in slow, swelling waves, the way breath rises and falls, the way sleep rises and falls. At first, it was noticeable, and then it became part of the air itself, the sound the summer made when it was simply being summer, present and full, and not thinking about autumn yet. In the evenings, when the heat had softened and the sky began to take on that slow progression of colors that a summer sunset offers, Clara would bring a glass of something cold out to the porch swing and sit and watch it. The yard would change colors as the light changed. The green of the grass would deepen. The white of the fence would go golden, then pink, then a soft gray. The oak tree at the corner of the yard would hold the light in its upper branches long after the yard below had gone into shadow. And then the fireflies would begin. She had forgotten about fireflies, or perhaps she had not forgotten exactly, but had not thought about them in years, had not thought about how they look in a summer yard at dusk, appearing first as 1 or 2, shy and tentative, and then more, and then suddenly, without any announcement, the yard is full of them, each one carrying its own brief, cold light through the warm air. They did not hurry, they drifted, their lights blinking in a rhythm that was not quite random, that had a softness to it, a quality almost of breathing. Clara sat in the swing and watched them and felt something loosen in her that she had not quite known was tight. Rosie was unimpressed by the fireflies, having long ago reached a philosophical accommodation with all phenomena that were not food. She sat on the porch railing and looked out at the yard with her usual composure. One evening, about 3 weeks into her stay, Clara was sitting on the porch in the near dark when she heard Mr. Aldrich come out onto his own porch across the lane. She could not see him clearly, just a shape in a chair, the small orange point of light from the pipe he occasionally smoked. They did not call to each other. They simply sat, each on their own porch, in the gathering dark, with the fireflies moving between them in the yard, and the cicadas singing in the trees. And somewhere a long way down the road a dog barking once, and then going quiet. It was the kind of moment that does not announce itself as anything special. It just is, and because it does not announce itself, it stays. There was a drawer in the kitchen, the second drawer on the left-hand side, that Clara had been meaning to sort since the first week. She kept putting it off, not out of avoidance exactly, but because every time she opened it she found herself slowing down, not sorting, just looking. The drawer held, among other things, a collection of objects that had accumulated over decades, in the way that things accumulate in the kitchens of people who live long, careful lives. There was a small notepad with a blue cover, half filled with grocery lists in Nora's writing. There was a cork, a candle stub, a length of twine wrapped around itself with a knot at each end, and a set of small metal cookie cutters in the shapes of a star, a tree, a crescent moon, and a small round animal that might have been a bunny or might have been a bear. There was also a photograph, face down, and when Clara turned it over, she found a picture of herself at perhaps 5 or 6 years old, sitting on this very porch with Nora, both of them with glasses of lemonade, Nora's hand resting on Clara's knee. The two of them not looking at the camera, but at something beyond it. Something in the yard, something that must have been interesting in that slow summer afternoon way. And both of them smiling, not at the camera, not for the camera, just smiling because of whatever they were seeing. Clara set the photograph on the counter where she could see it from anywhere in the kitchen. She did not finish sorting the drawer. She left it as it was. The days began to carry a softness into themselves that was different from the first weeks. The novelty of being somewhere new had worn away, which meant that what remained was simply the place itself. The house, settling into evening, the garden, doing what gardens do, the light on the wooden floors, shifting as the hours moved, drawing long, pale shapes in the morning and shorter, brighter ones by noon, then lengthening again in the afternoon into something golden and almost weightless. The creak of the second porch step, the sound the screen door made. She had begun to sleep deeply, not just well, but deeply, in a way that had its own quality, a feeling upon waking of having gone somewhere real and come back unhurried. She would wake most mornings to birdsong and the particular coolness of a summer morning before the heat arrived, and she would lie still and simply be in it. There is a moment, just at the edge of full wakefulness, when the mind is still soft enough that it has not yet gathered its usual cargo of thought and intention. Clara had learned to stay in that moment a little longer each morning, to let herself rest in it, the way you rest in warm water, not moving, not thinking about moving. Rosie was usually already awake and already in the sun. Some afternoons Clara sat in the garden, not weeding exactly, though she did some of that too, but mostly just sitting in the old wooden chair that she had brought out from the shed and set near the lavender. The lavender was in full bloom by then, heavy with it, the kind of purple-gray that is almost blue, and the smell of it in the afternoon heat was extraordinary, warm and slow and ancient somehow, the smell of something that had been growing in one form or another for a very long time. Bees worked through the lavender stems with quiet purpose. She watched them. There is something about watching a bee in a flower, the absolute focus of the thing, the complete absorption, that is oddly settling. Nothing else exists for a bee in a flower. Everything else has been set aside. She thought sometimes about what her grandmother had been like at her age. Nora would have been in this garden, she supposed. Nora would have been at the kitchen table. Nora would have been in the porch swing in the evenings, watching the fireflies, making mental note of each child who passed on their bicycle in the lane, committing their faces to memory with that particular care she gave to everything that mattered to her. Nora had been a person who paid attention, not in any showy way, not in a way that called attention to itself, just quietly, just steadily, just as a matter of how she moved through the world. Clara thought she would like to learn to do that a little better. There was an evening late in July when a rainstorm came through, just before sunset, a real summer rain, fast and warm, the kind that arrives without much announcement and leaves just as suddenly. Clara had been on the porch when she saw the sky in the west go a darker shade of gray, and then the smell of rain reached her before the rain did. That particular smell of rain approaching across open ground, dusty and electric and green all at once. She stayed on the porch as it arrived, moving back to the railing just inside the overhang, and felt the temperature drop 3 or 4 degrees in a matter of moments. The rain came down in large, generous drops, and the garden received it with a visible happiness, the sunflowers bowing their heads and then lifting, the lavender bending and releasing its smell all at once, the grass going suddenly brighter. It lasted perhaps 15 minutes, and when it was over and the sky in the west had turned pink behind the departing clouds, and the whole yard was dripping and shining and smelling of wet earth and wet grass and something sweet from the garden, Clara stood on the porch and listened to the silence that rain leaves behind it. It is a particular silence, fuller, somehow, than the silence before, as if the rain had cleaned the air of all its sound and left only the essential sounds, a bird somewhere near, a single drop falling from the eave, the last soft settling of water in the grass. Rosie had been inside, perfectly dry, watching the whole thing from the sitting room window with an expression that suggested she found weather mildly beneath her dignity. August arrived without making much of a fuss about it. The mornings were still warm, the afternoons still long, but something in the light had shifted by a degree or two toward something less absolute. The evenings came a little earlier. The shadows fell at slightly different angles. The summer was not ending. Not yet. Nothing so dramatic as that. But it was beginning to have an awareness of its own edges, the way a long, unhurried day begins to know, somewhere in its middle, that it will not go on forever. Clara was at peace with this. She had come to love the particular beauty of things that are aware of being temporary. The fireflies, which had begun to thin out a little in the evenings. The tomatoes in Mr. Aldrich's garden, which he brought over in paper bags, now with a cheerful regularity. The late afternoon light, which had taken on a quality that she could only describe as generous, as if the sun were making an extra effort to be lovely, knowing what was coming. She had fallen into a kind of routine, though calling it a routine made it sound more deliberate than it was. She woke when she woke. She made tea. She fed Rosie. She sat on the porch. She walked, or she sat in the garden, or she read a few pages of a book she was carrying more as a companion than a project. She made lemonade. She listened to the radio in the afternoon. In the evenings, she sat in the swing and watched the light go. She slept deeply and without argument. There is a particular gift in a summer like this, and Clara understood by now that she had been given it, not because she had earned it or arranged it cleverly, but because she had been still enough to receive it. The farmhouse, and the lane, and the garden, and the creek, and the smell of the lavender in the afternoon, and the sound of the screen door, and the slow, golden light that was right now, even as she sat in the swing on a late August evening, pooling in the grass, and touching the oak tree at the corner of the yard, and finding its way between the leaves, and falling in soft, broken pieces on the porch floor. All of this was a gift, and she held it the way you hold something warm in both hands, not tightly, just there, just present. Mr. Aldrich came by on one of those last evenings with a jar of honey from his neighbor's bees, a gift he said simply by holding it out, and Clara held it up to the light and looked through the amber of it at the yard, at the last of the evening light, and the honey and the light were almost the same color, the color of late summer, the color of long days and warm evenings, and the particular sweetness of something that is just as it should be. They sat on the porch until the fireflies came. There were fewer of them now, a handful where there had been hundreds, but each one seemed somehow more distinct for the thinning, each small light more visible against the dark. Clara watched one move through the grass near the garden fence, appearing and disappearing in its own rhythm, patient and small, and carrying its light through the warm summer dark, without any concern for whether anyone was watching. She watched it for a long time. Rosie had fallen asleep on the porch railing, one paw draped over the edge, her breathing slow and perfectly even. The night sounds were fully themselves by now. The crickets had taken over from the cicadas as the summer aged, and their sound was softer and higher, and had a quality of being closer somehow, more intimate, as if they were in the grass just beyond the porch steps and were not particularly concerned about being heard. Somewhere in the distance, very far away, a train passed with a low sound that lasted only a moment and then was gone, dissolved into the night, the way sounds do when the night is large enough to hold them. Clara let her head rest back against the porch swing. She let her eyes go soft. The yard was dark now, except for the occasional small light of a firefly, and the sky above the trees was deep and full of stars, the kind of stars that you can only see when the nearest city is far enough away that the sky can be itself, dense and layered and so old that the word old does not really mean anything next to it. She thought about her grandmother in this swing. She thought about Nora sitting here on nights exactly like this, in summers exactly like this, with the same crickets and the same stars and the same screen door behind her. And she thought about how the same things can keep being themselves across so many years, across so many people, sitting quietly in the same spot, watching the same night arrive. And she found that thought to be one of the most comforting things she had encountered in a long time. Not sad, just deep. The way things that have been around for a long time are deep. The way the old oak at the corner of the yard is deep. The way the lane is deep. The way a summer like this is deep, carrying inside it all the summers that came before it, all the children who ran through these fields, all the people who made lemonade in this kitchen and sat in this swing and watched these fireflies, and then, eventually, slowly, let the night close around them and let themselves rest. If you're still awake and listening, thank you for spending this quiet time with me. If you'd like more stories like this one, you can leave a soft like, subscribe to the channel, and whisper a word in the comments, so I know what kind of story you'd like next. Sleep well. you.